Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang. Episode 26. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ-LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Greetings and salutations. I'm Hunter Ackerman, here to read some classic literature for you and my beastly feline companion Wolfgang. So Wolfus, what do you want to hear? Okay, before I start this story, I'm going to see if I can wrangle my co-host, because I did say he was sitting here in the chair for like 45 minutes. Well, before that, while I was setting up, he was sitting in front of the fireplace inside where his chair is supposed to be, and he was just like sitting there upright and just kind of looking, waiting. I'm going to make sure he's not sitting in front of the wrong fire. I'll be right back. Right back.
There's people on the internet that want to see you. Okay, there we are. Yeah. Did you get a bite? Okay. Let's get you all settled in here. All right, you ready?
This is a good story we have. This evening's story, it's called Minions of the Moon, and it is not science fiction. It does not take place on the moon, but all of that will make sense presently. This is by Fredrick William Robinson. He was born in 1830. He died in 1901. Robinson was an English novelist. He was a magazine editor. He was a drama critic. Everybody's a critic. He was a pretty prolific writer. He published a lot of things during his life, but he's not that well known today. Interestingly enough, one of his ardent readers was Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who is, I know him, actually. I know Rossetti as a painter, but Rossetti was a poet as well. So, with the preamble out of the way, this is Minions of the Moon, published in 1887 by F.W. Robinson. Our story is of the time when George III was king, and our scene of action lies only at an old farmhouse 6 miles or so from Finchley, a quaint, ramshackle, commodious, old-fashioned, thatched farmhouse that we only see in pictures now, and which has long since been improved off the face of the earth. It was a farm estate that was flourishing bravely in those dear, disreputable days when few throve and many starved, and younger sons of gentry, without interest at court or parliament, either cut the country which served them so poorly, or took to business on the king's highway and served the country badly in return. The Maythorpe farm belonged to the Pemberthes, and had descended from father to son from days lying too far back to reckon up to just now, and a conservative, bad-tempered race were the Pemberthes, with a reputation of feathering their own nests well and dyeing in them fat and prosperous. There were a good many Pemberthes scattered about the counties, but it was generally understood in the family that the head of the clan, as it were, lived at Maythorpe Farm near Finchley, and here the Pemberthes would gather on any great occasion, such as a marriage, a funeral, or christening. There had been a grand funeral at Maythorpe Farm only a few days before our story opens, for Reuben Pemberthy had been consigned to his grave at the early age of 49. Reuben Pemberthy had left one son behind him, also named Reuben, a stalwart, good-looking young fellow who, at 22, was quite as well able to manage the farm as everybody on it, as his father had been before him. He had got rid of all his relatives except for 2 of them after his father's funeral. Those 2 were staying because it was signed, sealed, and delivered that the younger woman, his cousin, pretty Sophie Tarn, was to be married soon to the present Reuben Pemberthy, who had wooed her and won her consent when he went down to her mother's house at King's Norton for a few days' trip last summer. Being a steady, handsome fellow who made love in downright earnest, he impressed Sophie's 18 years and was somewhat timidly but graciously accepted as an affianced suitor. It was thought at King's Norton that Mrs. Tarn had done a better stroke of business in the first year of her widowhood than her late husband had done, always an unlucky wretch, Timothy, in the whole course of his entire life. And now Sophie Tarn and her mother were staying for a few days longer at Maythorpe Farm after the funeral. Mrs. Tarn, having been a real Pemberthy before her unfortunate marriage with the improvident draper of King's Norton, was quite one of the family, and seemed more at home at Finchley than was the new widow, Mrs. Pemberthy, a poor, unlucky lady, a victim to a chronic state of twittering and jingling and twitching, but one who, despite her shivers, had made the late Reuben a good wife, and was a fair housekeeper even now, although superintending housekeeping in jumps like a palsy-stricken kangaroo. So, Sophie and her bustling mother were of material assistance to Mrs. Pemberthy, and the presence of Sophie in that house of mourning, where the mourning had been speedily got over and business had begun again with commendable celerity, was a considerable source of comfort to young Reuben. When he had leisure after business hours, which was not always the case, to resume those tender relations which had borne to him last autumn such happy fruit of promise. There was not much work to do at the farm in the winter-time, when the nights were long and the days were short. Yet Reuben Pemberthy was generally busy in one way or another, and on this particular day on which our story opens, Reuben was away at High Barnet. It had been a dull, dark day, followed by a dull, dark night. The farm servants had gone to their homes, save the few that were attached to the premises, such as the scullery maids and dairy maids, and Mrs. Pemberthy, Mrs. Tarn, and her daughter Sophie were waiting early supper for Reuben, and wondering what kept him so long from his home and from his sweetheart. Mrs. Tarn, accustomed mayhap to the roar and bustle of King's Norton, found the farm at Finchley a trifle dull and lonely. Not that in a few days after a funeral she could expect any excessive display of life or frivolity. That evening she was a trifle nervous as to the whereabouts of her future son-in-law, who had faithfully promised to be home a clear hour and a half before now, and whose word might be always taken to be as good as his bond. Mrs. Tarn was the most restless of the 3 women. Sophie was not of a nervous temperament. Indeed, for her 18 years, was apparently a little too cool and methodical. And she was not flurried that evening over the delay in the arrival home of Reuben Pemberthy. She was not imaginative like her mother,
and did not associate delay with the dangers of a dark night, though the nights were full of danger in the good old times of the third King George. She went to the door to look out, after her mother had tripped there for the 7th or 8th time, not for appearance's sake, for she was above that, but to keep her mother company, and to suggest that these frequent excursions to the front door would end in a bad cold. "I can't help fearing that something has happened to Rue," said the mother. "He's always so true to time." "There's so many things to keep a man late, Mother, not to keep Reuben. If he said what hour he'd be back, he's like his father, my poor brother. He'd do it to the minute, even if there weren't any reason for his hurry." "Which there is," said Sophie, archly. "Which there is, Sophie. And why are you so quiet over this? I don't know. When poor Mr. Tarn was out late, and he was often very, very late, and the Lord knows where he'd been either, I couldn't keep a limb of me still till he came home again. I was as fidgety as your aunt there till I was sure he was safe and sound." "But he always came home safe and sound, Mother." "Nearly always. I mind the time once, though. Bless us and save us, what a gust!" she cried as the wind came swooping down the hill at them, swirling past them into the dark passage and puffing the lights out in the big pantry beyond, where the maids began to scream. "I hope he hasn't been blown off his horse." "Not very likely that," said Sophie, "and Reuben, the best horseman in all the country. But come in out of the gale, Mother. The sleet cuts like a knife, too. He will not come home any the sooner for your letting the wind into the house, and... Why, here he comes after all! Hark!" There was a rattling of horses' hooves on the frost-bound road. It was a long way off in the distance, but it was the unmistakable signal of a well-mounted traveler approaching. It was more than one well-mounted traveler. It became quickly apparent because the clattering was so loud and incessant and numerous. "Soldiers," said Sophie. "What could bring them this way?" "It's the farmers coming the same way as Reuben for protection's sake these winter nights, child." "Protection? Haven't you heard of the highwaymen about, and how a single traveler is never safe in these parts? Or a double one, either. Perhaps these are highwaymen." "Oh, good gracious! Let us get indoors and bar up," cried Mrs. Tarn, wholly forgetful of Reuben Pemberthy's safety after this suggestion. "Yes, it's as likely to be highwaymen as it is to be soldiers." It was indeed more likely. It was pretty conclusive that the odds were in favor of highwaymen when, 5 minutes afterward, 8 mounted men rode up to the Maythorpe farmhouse, dismounted with considerable noise and bustle, and commenced at the stout oaken door with the butt-ends of their riding whips, hammering away incessantly and shouting out as much strong language in their vehemence. This, being fortunately bawled forth all at once, was incomprehensible to the dwellers within doors, who were now all scared and no longer cool nor self-possessed. "Robbers!" said Mrs. Tarn. "We've never been molested before, at least not for 20 years or more," said Mrs. Pemberthy. "And then is it likely to be any of Reuben's friends?" asked Sophie timidly. "Oh, no. Reuben has no bellowing crowd like that for friends. Ask who's there. Somebody." But nobody would go to the door save Sophie Tarn herself. The maids were huddled in a heap together in a corner of the dairy and refused to budge an inch, and Mrs. Tarn was shaking more than Mrs. Pemberthy. Sophie, with the colour gone from her face, went boldly back to the door, where the hammering on the panels continued and would have split anything of a less tough fibre than the English oak of which they were constructed. "Who's there? What do you want?" she gave out in a shrill falsetto, but no one heard her until the questions were repeated about an octave and a half higher. "Hold on, Stango. There's a woman calling to us. Stop your row, will you?" A sudden cessation of the battering ensued, and someone was heard going rapidly backward over cobblestones amid the laughter of the rest, who had all dismounted and were standing outside in the cold with their hands upon their horses' bridles. "Who's there?" asked Sophie Tarn again. "Travellers, in need of assistance, and who," began a polite and even musical voice, which was interrupted by a hoarse voice. "Open in the names of the king, will you?" "Open in the fiend's name, won't you?" called out a third and hoarser voice, "or we'll fire through the windows and burn the place down, eh?" "What do you want?" "Silence," shouted the first one again. "Let me explain, you dogs, before you bark again." There was a pause, and the polite gentleman began again in his mellifluous voice. "We are travellers. Right, belated. We require corn for our horses, food for ourselves. There's no occasion for alarm. My friends are noisy, but harmless, I assure you, and the favour of admittance and entertainment here will be duly appreciated. To refuse your hospitality, the hospitality of the Pemberthys, is only to expose yourselves to considerable inconvenience, I may fear." "Spoken like a book, Captain." "And, as we intend to come in at all risks," added a deeper voice, "it will be better for you not to try and keep us out. D'ye hear? D'ye hear? Captain, if you shake me by the collar again, I'll put a bullet through you, I say—" "Silence! Let the worthy folks inside consider the position for 5 minutes. Not a minute longer if they don't want a place burned about their ears, mind you," cried a voice that had not spoken yet. "Who are you?" asked Sophie, still inclined to parley. "Just travellers. I've told you that." "Thieves, cutthroats, murderers, 8 of us, knights of the road, gentlemen of the highway, and not to be trifled with when half-starved and hard-driven," cried the horseman. "Will that there satisfy you, wench? Will you let us in or not? It's easy enough for us to smash in the windows and get in that way, ain't it?" Yes, in fact, it was indeed very easy. "Wait 5 minutes, please," said Sophie. She went back to the parlour, and to the 2 shivering women in the crowd of maids who had crept from the dairy to the farm parlour, having greater faith in numbers now. "They had better come in, Aunt, especially as we are quite helpless to keep them out. I could fire that gun," Sophie said, pointing to an unwieldy old blunderbuss slung by straps to the ceiling, "and I know it's loaded, but I'm afraid it wouldn't be of much use." "I'm afraid it might make them angry," said Mrs. Pemberthy. "It would only kill one at best," remarked Mrs. Thorne with a heavy sigh. "And the rest of the men would kill us, the brutes," said Mrs. Pemberthy. "Yes, they'd better just come in." "Lord have mercy upon us," said Mrs. Tarn. "There's no help for it," said Mrs. Pemberthy. "Even Reuben would not have dared to keep them out. I mind now they're coming in like this 20 years agone. It was—" "I will see to them," said Sophie, who had become in her young, brave strength quite the mistress of the ceremonies. "Leave the rest to me." "And if you can persuade them to go away," began Mrs. Tarn, but her daughter had already disappeared and was parleying through the keyhole to the strangers without. "Such hospitality as we can offer, gentlemen, shall be at your service, providing, always, that you treat us with the respect due to gentlewomen and your hosts."
"Right, trust to that," was the reply. "I will answer for myself and me companions, Mrs. Pemberthy."
"You give me your word of honor?"
"My word of honor," he repeated. "Our words of honor, and speaking for all my good friends present. Is it not so, men?" "Aye, aye, aye, that's right," chorused the good friends. And then Sophie Tarn, not without an extra plunging of the heart beneath her white crossover, unlocked the stout oaken door and let in her unwelcome visitors. 7 out of the 8 seemed to tumble in all at once, pushing against one another in their eagerness to enter, laughing and shouting and stamping with the heels of their jackboots on the bright red tiles of the hall. The 8th intruder followed, a tall, thin man, pale-faced and stern and young, with a heavy horseman's cloak falling from his shoulders, the front of which was gathered up across his arms. A handsome, yet worn face. The face of one who had seen better days and known brighter times. A picturesque kind of vagabond, take him in the candlelight. He raised his hat and bowed low to Sophie Tarn, not offering to shake hands as the rest of them had done, who were crowding round her. Then he seemed to stand suddenly between them and their salutations, and to brush them unceremoniously aside. "You see to the horses, Stango and Grap," he said, singling out the most obtrusive and the most black-muzzled of his gang. "Mistress Pemberthy will perhaps kindly trust us for a while with the keys of the stables and of the corn bins." "They are here," said Sophie, detaching them from a bunch of keys which, in true housewifely fashion, hung from her belt. "The farm servants are away in the village, or they should help you, sir." "We're in the habit of helping ourselves very much," said one of the highmen, dryly. "Pray, don't apologise on that score, mistress."
2 of the men departed. 5 of them stalked into the farm parlor, flourishing their big hats and executing clumsy scrapings with their feet while bowing in mock fashion to the 2 nervous widows who sat in one corner, regarding them askance. The leader of these lawless ones dropped his cloak from his shoulders, left it trailing on the tile floor, and made a rapid signal with his hand to Sophie to pause an instant before she entered the room.
"Right, listen. Treat 'em with fair words, and not too much strong of drink," he said quickly. "We have a long ride before us." He said it like a warning, and Sophie nodded as though she took his advice and was grateful for it. Then they both went into the parlor and joined the company. The maidservant, becoming used to the position of making the best of it, began to bustle about and wait upon their visitors, who had already drawn up their seats to the supper table, which had been spread with good things 2 hours ago in anticipation of the return of Reuben Pemberthy to Maythorpe. It was an odd supper party at which Sophie Tarn presided, the highwaymen insisting, with much clamour and some emphatic oaths, that they would have no old woman like Mrs. Tarn and Mrs. Pemberthy at the head of the table. Sophie was a pretty wench,
and so must do the honors of the feast.
The young girl's health, gentlemen. We're 3 times 3, and may her husband be a match for her and good looks,
cried one admiring knight of the road, and then the toast was drunk. The ale flowed freely, and there was much laughter and loud jesting. The man whom they called
Guy
and
Captain
sat by Sophie's side. He ate very little and kept a watchful eye upon his men after Stango and his companion had come in from the stable and completed the number. He exchanged at first but few words with Sophie, though he surveyed her with a grave attention that brought the colour to her cheeks. He was a man upon guard. Presently he said, "You bear your position well. You're not alarmed at these wild fellows?" "No, not now. I don't think they would hurt me. Besides..." "Right, besides what?" he asked as she paused. "I have your word for them."
"Oh, yeah,"
he answered, "but it's only a highwayman's word." "I can trust it." "These men can be like demons when they like Mistress Pemberthy." Sophie did not think it worthwhile to inform the gentleman that her name was not Pemberthy. In actuality, it could not possibly matter to him, and there was a difficulty in explaining the relationship she bore to the family, regardless. "Why are you with such men as these?" she asked, wonderingly.
"Well, where should I be?"
"Where can I be else?" he asked, lightly now, but it was with a forced lightness of demeanour. Sophie Tarn was quite sure. "Helping your king? Not warring against him and his laws?" said Sophie, rather quickly. "I owe no allegiance to King George. I have always been a ne'er-do-well, despised and scouted by a hard father and a villainous brother or two. In life with these good fellows here is best to my mind. There's an independence in it. And frankly, I prefer to be independent. And I like the danger. A wronged man wrongs others in his turn, mistress. And it's my turn now." "Two wrongs cannot make a right." "Oh, I do not attempt the impossible, Mistress Pemberthy. What will be the end of this to you?" "Well, clearly it will be the gallows, if I cannot get my pistol out in time." He laughed lightly and naturally enough as Sophie shrank in abject terror from him. One could see he was a desperate man. Desperate despite his better manners. Probably he was as great an outcast as the rest of them, and as little to be trusted. "That is a dreadful end to look forward to," she said. "I don't look forward. What's the use, when that's the prospect? Your father, your brothers, would be glad that the end came soon," he concluded. "They're waiting for it patiently. They have prophesied it for the last 5 or so years." "They know, then?" "Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've taken care that they should know," he answered, laughing defiantly again. "And your mother? Does she know?" He paused and looked at her very hard. "Well, God forbid. So she is..." She's in heaven, where nothing is known of what goes on upon the earth.
How can you tell that?
There would be no peace in heaven otherwise, Mistress Pemberthy. Only great grief, intense shame, misery, despair, madness at the true knowledge of us all, he said, passionately. On earth, we men are hypocrites and liars, devils, slaves.
Well, not all men, said Sophie, thinking of Rue Pemberthy.
I've met none other. Perhaps I've sought none other. All my own fault. And as for my father and brothers, he added bitterly, they are worse than I am. And yet, oh, so respectable.
You turned highwaymen to...
Right, despite them, say. It's very near the truth.
It will be a poor excuse to your mother when you see her again.
Eh?
But Sophie had no time to continue so abstruse a subject with this misanthropical freebooter. Then she clapped her hand to her side and gave a little squeak of astonishment. What's the matter? Asked Captain Guy.
My keys! They've taken my keys!
And, sure enough, while Sophie Tarn had been talking to the captain, someone had severed the keys from her belt and made off with them. There was only a clean-cut black ribbon dangling at her waist instead.
It's that villain Stango, exclaimed the captain. I saw him pass a minute ago. He leaned over and whispered to you. To you, Kits. You remember?
Right. Oh, Stango, said Kits, with far too innocent an expression to be genuine.
Yeah, Stango. You know he did it.
All right, I dare say he did. I don't deny it, Captain, but I don't know where he's gone.
But I will know,
cried the captain, striking his hand upon the table and making every glass and plate jump thereon.
I will have no tricks played here without my consent. Am I your master, or are all you mine?
And here, we regret to say, Captain Guy swore a rather good deal and became perfectly unheroic and inelegant and rather unromantic. But his oaths had more effect upon his unruly followers than his protests, and they sat looking at him in a half-sullen, half-shame-faced manner, and would have probably succumbed to his influence had not attention been diverted and aroused by the reappearance of Stango, who staggered in with 4 or 5 great black bottles heaped high in his arms. A tremendous shout of applause and delight heralded his return to the parlour.
"We've been treated scurvily, my men," cried Stango. "Exceedingly scurvily. The best and strongest stuff in the cellar has been kept back from us. It's excellent. I've been tasting it first, lest all you should be poisoned, and there's more where this came from. Oceans more. Hurrah for Stango!"
The captain's voice was heard once more above the uproar, but it was only for a minute longer. There was a rush of 6 men towards Stango, a shouting, scrambling, fighting for the spirits which he had discovered, a crash of one black bottle to the floor, with the spirits streaming over the polished boards, and the unceremonious tilting over the upper part of the supper table in the ruffians' wild eagerness for drink.
"To horse! To horse, men! Have you forgotten how far we have to go?"
cried the captain. But they had indeed forgotten everything and did not heed him. They were drinking strong waters,
and they were heedless of the hour and the risks they ran by a protracted stay there. In 10 minutes from that time, Saturnalia had set in, and pandemonium seemed to have unloosed its choicest specimens. They sang, they danced, they raved, they blasphemed, they crowed like cocks, they fired pistols at the chimney ornaments, they chased the maidservants from one room to another, they whirled round the room with Mrs. Tarn and Mrs. Pemberthy. They would have made a plunge at Sophie Tarn next, had not the captain, very white and stern now, stood close to her side with a cocked pistol in his right hand. "I shall shoot the first man who touches you," he said between his set teeth.
Well, I will get away from them soon. For heaven's sake, for mine, do not add to the horror of this night, sir,
implored Sophie. Gentlemanly, he paused. "I beg your pardon," he said in a low tone of voice, "but I'm powerless to help you unless I quell these wolves at once. They're gone off for more drink."
What is to be done?
"Can you sing, Mistress Pemberthy?"
Yes, a little. At least a little they say so,"
she said, blushing at her own self-praise. "Sing something to gain time. I'll slip away while you're singing and get the horses round to the front door. Do not be afraid." "Gentlemen!" he cried in a loud voice, bringing the handle of his pistol smartly on the head of the man nearest to him to emphasize his discourse. "Mistress Pemberthy will oblige the company with a song. Order and attention for the lady." "A song! A song!" exclaimed the highwaymen, clapping their hands and stamping their heels upon the floor. And then, amid the pause which followed, Sophie Tarn began a plaintive little ballad in a sweet, tremulous voice, which gathered strength as she proceeded. It was a strange scene awaiting the return of Reuben Pemberthy, whose tall form stood in the doorway before Sophie had finished her sweet, simple rendering of an old English ballad. Reuben's round blue eyes were distended with surprise, and his mouth, generally very set and close, like the mouth of a steel purse, was on this special occasion, and for a while, wide open in disbelief. Sophie Tarn singing her best to amuse this vile and disorderly crew who sat or stood around the room, half drunk with glasses in their hands, pipes in their mouths, and the formidable old-fashioned horse pistols in their pockets. And who was the handsome man with the long, black, flowing hair and a pale face standing by Sophie's side? His Sophie. This man in a suit of soiled brocade and tarnished lace, with a hat under his arm and a pistol in his hand, the leader of these robbers, the very man who had stopped him on the King's Highway 3 hours ago and taken every coin which he had brought away from Barnett, who had, with the help of these other scoundrels, getting mad drunk on his brandy, taken away his horse and left him bound to a gate by the roadside because he would not be quietly robbed, but must make a fuss over it and fight and kick in a most unbecoming fashion and without any regard for the numbers by whom he had been assailed. "I did not think you could sing like that," said the captain, quietly and in a low voice, when Sophie had finished her song, and a great shout of approval was echoing throughout the farm and many 100 yards beyond it.
"You have not got the horses ready,"
said Sophie, becoming aware that he was still at her side. "You promised—"
"I could not leave you while you were singing, miss."
"Did you know that was my mother's song?"
"How could I know that?"
No,
No, of course not, but how strange. How strange. How truly singular and bizarre. There's your brother at the door. I have had the honour of meeting Master Pemberthy of Finchley earlier this evening, I think. A brave young gentleman. You should be proud of him. My Oh, it is Roo! Roo, where have you been? Why did you not come before to help us, to tell us what to do? And Sophie Tarn ran to him and put her arms round his neck and burst into tears. It was not a wise step on Sophie's part, but it was the reaction at the sight of her sweetheart, at the glimpse, as it were, of deliverance. Right. There, Sophie. Don't cry. Keep a stout heart, he whispered. If these villains have robbed us, they will not be triumphant long. It will be my turn to crow presently. I don't understand. I can't explain now. Keep a good face. Ply them with more drink. Watch me.
Well, my friends, he said in a loud voice, you have stolen a march upon me this time, but I've got home, you see, in time to welcome you to Maythorpe and share in your festivity. I'm a Pemberthy, and not likely to cry over spilt milk. More liquor for the gentlemen, you wenches, and be quick with it. Captain, here's to you and your companions, and next time you catch a Pemberthy, treat him more gently in return for a welcome here. More liquor, girls. The gentlemen are thirsty after their long ride.
Reuben drank to the healths of the gentlemen by whom he was surrounded. He was very much at home in his own house, very cool and undismayed, like Wolfgang himself, having recovered from his surprise at finding an evening party celebrated there. The highwaymen were too much excited to see anything remarkable in the effusion of Reuben Pemberthy's greeting. They were lawless times, when farmers and highwaymen were often in accord and dealt in one another's horses and drove various bargains at odd seasons and in odd corners of the marketplaces, and Reuben Pemberthy was not unknown to them, though they had treated him with scant respect upon a lonely country road when they were impressed by the fact that he was riding homeward with well-lined pockets after a day's huckstering. They cheered Mr. Pemberthy's sentiments, all but the captain, who regarded him very critically, although bowing very low while his health was drunk. My cousin and my future bride, gentlemen, will sing you another song, and I don't mind following suit myself, just to show that there's no ill feeling between us. And our worthy captain, he will oblige after me, I am sure. It may be a good many years before any of us meet again. It may, said the captain, laconically.
I cannot sing any more, Reuben,
cried Sophie. Try, Sophie, for all our sakes, our home's sake, the home they would strip or burn to the ground if only they had the chance. Why do you wish to keep them here? Sophie whispered back to him. I was released by a troop of soldiers who were coming in this direction, he said hurriedly. They have gone on toward Finchley in search of these robbers, but failing to find them, they will return here as my guests till morning. That was their promise.
Oh.
Sophie could not say more. Reuben had left her side and was talking and laughing with Stango as though he loved him.
Your sweetheart, then, this cock of the game,
said the captain to Sophie as he approached her once more.
Yes? I need to wish you much joy, for frankly I see but little toward it, as the poet says.
He
he remarked bluntly. He will not make you a good husband. You cannot say that. It's a hard face that will look into yours, mistress, and when trouble comes, it will not look pleasantly. But you're going to sing again? I'm glad for that. You promised to go away, long since. I did, but the host has returned, and frankly, I distrust him. I'm waiting now to see the end of it. No, I hope not. Pray, go, sir, go. Is there danger? Yes. I thought so. I'm fond of danger. I've told you. It braces me up. Why are you so pale? You've been kind to me, and you've saved me from indignity. Please, pray, take your men away at once. They will not go, and I will not desert them. For my sake, do. A song, all right? Just... No more love-making tonight, Captain. A song from the farmer's pretty lass, cried out the men. And then Sophie began to sing again. This time, a love song. The song of a maiden waiting for her soldier boy to come back from the wars. A maiden waiting for him, listening for him. Hearing the tramp of his regiment on the way toward her, she looked at Captain Guy as she sang, and with much entreaty in her gaze, and he looked back at her from under the cock of his hat, which he had pulled over his brows. Then he wavered and stole out of the room.
This is part 1 of Minions of the Moon. Recorded outdoors at a different time and place. Yeah, he's got resting beast face as he looks at me kind of accusingly for the lack of continuity in this. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Endorsed by Wolfgang Beastly. Produced by GWC Productions. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network.